Trump thought he could bully Canada into submission with his devastating 25% tariffs, but his plan is spectacularly backfiring. What started as economic warfare has exposed a critical weakness in Trump's strategy, and it all centers around a remote stretch of Canadian wilderness that could determine the future of North American power. We're talking about Ontario's Ring of Fire, a mineral-rich region that Trump desperately needs but can't control. And now, his own aggressive tactics are pushing Canada to weaponize the very resources he covets most. The Ring of Fire isn't just any mining region. This crescent-shaped territory in northern Ontario's James Bay lowlands contains some of the world's most critical mineral deposits: chromite, nickel, copper, and platinum group metals that power everything from electric vehicle batteries to military technology. For years, these resources sat largely untapped, but Trump's trade war has transformed this remote wilderness into the epicenter of a geopolitical battle that could reshape North America forever. When Trump returned to office, he immediately declared economic war on Canada, imposing sweeping 25% tariffs on virtually all Canadian goods. But here's where his strategy reveals its fatal flaw. He carved out a special 10% rate for Canadian energy and critical minerals. Why? Because America's industrial complex would collapse without them. As mining expert Elizabeth Stein pointed out, if Trump didn't desperately need these minerals, he would have slapped the full 25% tariff on them too. His selective tariff strategy accidentally exposed America's Achilles heel. Canada holds the cards Trump needs but can't admit he depends on.
Canada and Mexico say they're strengthening ties on trade and security as both countries face growing economic pressure from the United States. After a meeting in Mexico City, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum emphasized their commitment to working closely with Washington. Carney told reporters, "We complement the United States. We make them stronger, and we are all stronger together." The renewed cooperation comes as the U.S. imposes heavy tariffs, 50% on Canadian steel, 25% on some Mexican pharmaceuticals, and a 25% so-called fentanyl tariff targeting Mexico. This latest move highlights rising tensions in North American trade.
The country is literally the storehouse of every critical mineral American industry requires. From uranium to potash, from nickel to rare earth elements, Canada has them all.
That is going to become increasingly evident. 85% of our energy is clean. We're one of the world's largest LNG exporters, one of the largest reserves of oil and gas. We measure additions to our grid in 10 gigawatt chunks. To put it in perspective, and you will see that with time. We are top 5 in 10 of the world's most important critical minerals. 40% of the world's listed mining companies are in Canada, to give a perspective there. We are a leading developer of AI, and our research universities are some of the biggest producers in volume of AI.
Michigan-based critical minerals expert Jack Lifton put it bluntly, Canada is the solution to America's mineral dependence problem, not the problem. Yet Trump's confrontational approach is driving away his most reliable supplier. The irony is devastating for Trump's position. His tariff war was supposed to be forcing Canada into submission, but instead it's accelerating Canada's plans to develop the Ring of Fire independently.
With every passing week, more pessimistic about this process. Both tracks, the Canada-US talks that are supposedly underway and the CUSMA review that's now starting, it's clear the Trump administration feels emboldened. They feel they're winning, and I think they're going to give Canada a really hard time as this CUSMA review unfolds. I think the country and the government should prepare for a long and at times painful process.
Do you think, Derek, do you have a similar instinct that Trump doesn't see any negatives right now to keeping these tariffs in particular on the sectors I mentioned on? And do you think ultimately we're in for a long battle?
Very much with what Brian just said, we need to be very wary of entering into a negotiation with an administration that already is thrown out the one we have and violated every known principle of international trade. So this is not an easy challenge. It may be better to talk than not to talk, But, I don't know what progress, if any, we've made in the discussions we've had with the Americans thus far. So I'm very skeptical. I'm very wary. I don't trust this administration. I don't think anybody should.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has named exploiting the Ring of Fire as one of the strategic projects his government will back to supercharge Canada's Trump-threatened economy. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has vowed to fast-track Ring of Fire infrastructure, declaring he's ready to jump on a bulldozer himself to build access roads. Trump's aggressive tactics are creating exactly the opposite of what he intended. Instead of making Canada more dependent on American markets, he's forcing Canadian leaders to diversify away from U.S. trade relationships. The tariff war has sparked a national conversation in Canada about treating natural resources as strategic assets rather than commodities to be exported south.
Premiers employed to try and make that a reality. You and I have spoken before about how much less pressure there appears on Donald Trump this time around to do things that make economic sense. Have you seen any discernible difference? Do you still think that there could be any difference throughout this process if we still decided to employ that kind of approach?
Well, I'll give you one example. There are 85 senators in the U.S. who want to increase sanctions against Russia, and yet nothing is happening. Why? Because they don't want to antagonize the president. He is all-powerful. As Brian well knows, a normal trade negotiation is a balance of give and take. With this administration, it's a unilateral take. All the giving is done by the negotiating partner. That's why it's going to be difficult. If I'm encouraged by anything of late, it's that it seems that Michael Sabia has been put in charge of this negotiation. That's a good thing. He's a professional, he knows his stuff, and he's tough-minded. And that's exactly what we need. We don't need more weenies dealing with the administration. We need somebody with some backbone.
This represents a fundamental shift that could permanently alter North American resource flows. The timing couldn't be worse for Trump's broader geopolitical ambitions. His repeated threats to annex Canada and make it the 51st state have only strengthened Canadian resolve to maintain sovereignty over their mineral wealth. Prime Minister Trudeau has directly stated that Trump's annexation threats are motivated by his desire to control Canada's critical minerals. This public acknowledgement has transformed what might have been quiet economic negotiations into a matter of national pride and sovereignty. But Trump's problems go deeper than just economic miscalculation. His trade war is fracturing the very North American supply chains that give the continent competitive advantages over China. For decades, integrated Canada-US supply chains have been a cornerstone of North American industrial strength. Trump's tariffs are deliberately dismantling this integration, potentially handing strategic advantages to Chinese competitors who are already dominating global critical mineral processing. The response from Canadian leaders reveals how badly Trump has miscalculated. Canada has retaliated with $30 billion worth of duties against the United States, with another $125 billion in tariffs coming soon. Doug Ford has pulled American alcohol worth $1 billion annually from Ontario's liquor stores, canceled $30 billion in government contracts with U.S. suppliers, and killed a $100 million deal with Elon Musk's Starlink. These aren't just symbolic gestures, they're economically damaging counterpunches that show Canada won't be intimidated.
Without having to fly.
It's a lot of money to spend quickly and wisely, and for this industry, hoping to cash in on some of it, it's a very big deal.
I was at work and it was like, wow. After 30 years of trying to struggle to get people to pay attention to the Canadian Defence Industrial Base, I didn't really expect it.
To me, that's been the most notable thing of Mr. Carney's time in office.
Effectively, Canada is now in an arms race, kicked off with a June 9th announcement.
I'm announcing today that Canada will achieve NATO's 2% of GDP target this year, half a decade ahead of schedule.
That is a promise, quite possibly easier said than done.
And you can see Adrian's full story next week right here on The National. Next, the tiny PEI village getting international attention after being named one of the most beautiful.
The Indigenous dimension adds another layer of complexity that Trump's team clearly didn't anticipate. Saul Mamakwa, who represents the riding where the Ring of Fire is located, has made it clear that Indigenous communities won't be steamrolled by Trump's tariff pressure. His warning is direct. You cannot use a tariff war with the United States to override the rights of First Nations people who live on these lands. This means any accelerated development will require genuine consultation and benefit-sharing agreements, not the rushed extraction Trump's timeline demands. Market reactions show that investors understand the stakes better than Trump's team apparently does.
Yes, the tariffs on India make no sense. Granted, I mean, the tariffs on Canada are even crazier. We're America's greatest ally, we share a border, billions of dollars worth of trade. But not just that. We are so easily taken advantage of by America.
How do you think India played that?
Oh, better than Canada. It's hard to determine, right? Because it's the tariffs make no sense. Howard Lutnick and Peter Navarro are economically illiterate, so you're dealing with people in fantasy land, so it's all hypothetical. Like, so, you know, India likes to think that they play chess and like there's really strategic moves, right? So it's one tweet of Trump's or truth, right? A few caps lock sentences away from completely changing the narrative on India. So if I'm the Indians, I would say you're always one tweet away from friendship or total war, right?
Animosity.
Animosity to that. Pakistan will probably be used to take out like.
The Dow Jones fell 700 points when Trump's latest tariffs were announced, while Canadian mining stocks have seen increased interest as investors bet on Canada's resource independence. Companies like Cameco have experienced surges in investment as the market recognizes that Trump's trade war is actually strengthening Canada's position in critical sectors. Trump's executive order demanding increased American mineral production only highlights his desperation. On March 20th, 2025, the White House issued directives aimed at boosting domestic mineral extraction, but the reality is that America simply doesn't have the geological resources to replace Canadian supplies in any reasonable time frame. Building new mines takes decades, not months, and Trump's 4-year term won't be nearly enough to achieve mineral independence.
Keenan Sorokon reports Macklem couldn't think of a better place to talk about major changes to the global trade.
Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem spent the first of 2 days in Saskatoon Tuesday highlighting the new economic world Canada faces and the role Saskatchewan can play within it.
The ramifications of a new relationship with the United States are immense. And one thing is clear. We cannot afford to wait this out.
Over his roughly 20-minute speech to business and political leaders during a luncheon, Macklem highlighted 4 mega trends in global economics and their implications. The slow of trading, the United States not dominating trade anymore, but still dominating financial flows, and the trade imbalances from America's deficit to the surplus situations in China.
The strategic implications extend far beyond economics. Canada's decision to potentially designate the Ring of Fire as a region of strategic importance could trigger accelerated development timelines that bypass traditional approval processes. This represents a militarization of resource policy that directly responds to Trump's threats. When a friendly neighbor starts treating resource extraction as a national security priority, it signals a fundamental breakdown in the relationship. Expert analysis reveals the deeper game being played. University of Calgary's Elizabeth Stein suggests that Trump's team is using economic pressure to soften Canada up for a reciprocal mineral deal. The strategy appears to be impose enough economic pain to force Canada into an agreement that gives the U.S. preferential access to Canadian resources. But this approach is backfiring because it's generating nationalist resistance rather than economic compliance. The global context makes Trump's miscalculation even more significant. While he's alienating Canada, China has been steadily building alternative supply chains and processing capabilities. Trump's trade war is potentially pushing Canadian resources toward Asian markets just as the U.S. needs them most for its own industrial competition with China. This represents a strategic blunder of historic proportions. Canadian politicians across party lines are now united in opposition to Trump's approach. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, despite his typical criticism of liberal policies, declared that Trump has stabbed America's best friend in the back. His message to Trump was clear: Canada will fight back, defend its people and economy, and put Canada first. When Canadian conservatives are defending liberal trade policies, it shows how completely Trump has unified Canadian opposition. The infrastructure challenges Trump's team apparently didn't consider are massive. The Ring of Fire is accessible only by ice road in winter or plane in other months. There's no connection to provincial highway networks, no permanent transportation infrastructure, and no processing facilities. Developing these resources requires the kind of long-term partnership and massive infrastructure investment that Trump's confrontational approach makes impossible. Environmental and regulatory hurdles add additional complexity. Recent federal court decisions have raised the bar for consultation obligations under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Any company trying to rush development in response to Trump's pressure faces significant legal risks. The regulatory landscape has changed in ways that make fast-tracking nearly impossible without genuine Indigenous partnership. The economic modeling shows Trump's strategy is self-defeating. Analysts predict the Canadian economy could contract by 2.5% by early 2026, with inflation potentially exceeding 7%. But these same economic pressures are accelerating Canadian efforts to reduce dependence on U.S. markets. Short-term economic pain is generating long-term strategic independence, exactly the opposite of what Trump intended. Trump's tariff war has revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of modern resource geopolitics. In an interconnected global economy, aggressive, unilateral action often produces unintended consequences. By treating Canada as an adversary rather than a partner, Trump is forcing the development of alternative supply chains that will outlast his presidency. He's essentially funding Canada's independence from American markets. The Ring of Fire has become a symbol of Canadian sovereignty in the face of American pressure. What was once a remote mining prospect has been transformed into a test case for Canada's ability to control its own resources. Every accelerated approval, every infrastructure investment, every Indigenous consultation represents Canada's determination to develop these resources on its own terms, not Trump's timeline. Looking ahead, Trump's approach appears to be strengthening exactly the Canadian independence he claims to oppose. His annexation threats and trade pressure are generating a nationalist response that makes meaningful cooperation less likely, not more. The Ring of Fire development will proceed, but it will be designed to serve Canadian interests first, with American access dependent on respectful partnership rather than economic coercion. The ultimate irony is that Trump's tariff war may have achieved the opposite of everything he intended. Instead of forcing Canadian submission, he's accelerated Canadian independence. Instead of securing American access to critical minerals, he's motivated Canada to develop alternative markets. Instead of demonstrating American strength, he's revealed American dependence. The Ring of Fire has become Trump's worst nightmare, a symbol of Canadian sovereignty that his own aggressive tactics helped create.